All right, here we go. Welcome, everyone. We are here to discuss preseason prep. My name is Colton Gilbert. I teach and coach at Little Rock Central High School. And I was asked to do this for the Next Step Debate Institute by one of my students, Joe Ree. So shout out to Joe. I love what you all are doing here. And I'm so thankful that you asked me to be a part of it. I would have loved to have done this live so you all could ask questions, but I am currently in DC working for another debate camp. So can't be in two places at once, even though some judges try to judge twice at once in this online virtual setting, which I do not approve of, just for the record. So today we're going to discuss preseason prep. So let's get going. Where to start? So you want to start with debriefing debate camp, right? Even if you don't go to some of the bigger, larger ones, right? You probably know people that do. That's a good place to start, right? You want to not just look at their files that they produced on open evidence, which we'll get to later, but you also, more importantly here, want to talk to the people that you know that went there, right? Do you have squad mates that went there? Do you have friends in the community that went to different camps? Pick their brain, right? Did they what kind of apps were kind of like the big focus at their camp? What were some of the better arguments they produced? What were some of the more popular arguments that they produced? But also, what are some underdeveloped arguments? Because that might be a place where you can start. You know, if someone at camp says, you know, our lab found a few cards that talked about, you know, so and so, but we didn't really get to develop it. Well, you might have you some ground that could be ripe for, you know, an AF idea or some next stuff down the road. But if you didn't go to camp, one thing that I strongly suggest is just to read. I didn't get to have the camp experience that I wanted going into my senior year of high school. And one thing that I did when I got off of work at Tropical Smoothie every day was just read. I dedicated, anywhere between 2 to 3 hours a day reading stuff about the topic, you know, whether it was articles, cutting cards, cycling through books. I wanted to make sure that even though didn't get the technical portions of camp, and even though I didn't get the number of rounds that everyone get, that I would not be behind in terms of topic knowledge. So don't go it alone, right? You don't, hopefully, you know, policy is a two-person sport. So you're not debating alone, so you shouldn't be prepping alone. But more importantly, if you're on a squad, you know, even if you only got 2 teams, right? Splitting this up amongst 4 people is a lot easier than, say, just you and your partner, and you doing it by yourself or whatever, right? So we'll sort of walk through 5 key points that should be helpful, or 5 key things that I think will be helpful in terms of preseason prep and like approaching the debate. When we talk about preseason prep and tournaments, I'm talking more specifically about the first, you know, 1 to 3, maybe 4 tournaments that you go to during the year, where, you know, you may hit teams whose wikis aren't updated because they haven't read anything. They haven't been out yet. So you don't know what they might read. You know their tendencies, what their school traditionally reads, but you may not know what this team is going to read. They may hit you with a, you know, a curveball or something unexpected. So how do you deal with that, right? How do you prep for a topic? You know, let's go. First, scout. Just like you would incessantly check, I teach at Central. I know when, you know, you're looking at the entries of the tournament, people are clicking our kids' wikis to see what they read and if it's been updated. The same way, with the same fervor you check wikis, you should be checking camp evidence, right? This is no shade to programs out there, but a lot of times camps don't necessarily, the evidence that they produce, they say they put out on like open evidence, isn't always the best evidence, and sometimes can't be trusted. And it's not a slight or shade to any one particular institution or program, but it's more so that, you know, you have all these kids, you're doing a bunch of card cutting, and sometimes we focus on the quantity of arguments, and sometimes the quality of arguments takes a hit. So what you need to know what people cut at camp, right? This is a good jump start on a topic. I think too often we conceptualize camp as like to tell us what the debate season should look like. And I don't think that's the case. Camp should be something that is an introduction that sort of sets the playing field for where our starting point is, not necessarily what the entire topic should look like, right? So at these, you know, you don't want to just focus on one camp, right? If you have friends that went to Michigan, you got friends that went to Wake, you got friends that went to Stanford, you got friends that went to Dartmouth, right? Now you can sort of pick all their brains. What worked well at camp, what didn't, what AF, what neg arguments won the camp tournament. What do you think, having, you know, competed at camp? What were some of the better arguments? What were not some of the better arguments? These are things, you know, that personal information goes a long way. Look for points of convergence, right? What are some arguments that everyone cut that's somewhat similar? And then look for places where the camps diverge or they differ, right? Where, one camp may have focused on certain style of argumentation or these specific critiques, whereas other camps looked at other things, right? Gain insight, like I said earlier, friends, contacts, former opponents, whoever, right? Debate is a network of individuals who just want to help each other learn. So they'll help you out, I'm sure. So first thing first, scout camp evidence. Number 2, back file checks. We all hate them. We hate to see them, right? Check your back files. Now, I will say this probably does privilege larger, more established programs than it may smaller programs. But there are ways to sort of level the playing field and at least get access to some back files that may be helpful to you, right? So after camp, people cut what they really want to read. So you want to make sure that you're prepared for any and all debates that may hit you, right? Predicting a mechanism that the other team may read, probably difficult, right? But you don't have to worry about impacts, right? You know that people are probably going to read nuke war, some of econ decline impacts. They might read some bio-D or they may read a keystone species impact when it comes to environmental stuff. They may read some soft lefty stuff where they say we should prioritize structural violence. They may read a bunch of hedge good stuff, right? No matter the case may be, even though you can't predict mechanisms, you can a lot of times predict, what kind of arguments the other team's going to read. Same is true for KAFs, right? A lot of K teams, planless AFs, oftentimes just recycle the same arguments. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way at all, right? But they may recycle the same lit base and change up their topic links, right? So yeah, the method might be different, but if you can short circuit, say, their impact claims, or depending on what the impact is, you might just impact turn the AF completely, you kind of help put yourself in a position and be more competitive in these debates, right? So first things first, in checking your back files, always make sure that you are ready for the impact debates. Assuming you aren't privileged enough to be on a good squad, go to OpenEv. They have, you can download the entire open evidence collection from past years, right? So now we're debating water resources. To be honest, there are probably some files from the non-military oceans topic, what was that, 6-7 years ago, that may be applicable. Even if you don't want to read those types of arguments can sort of give you an insight or give you insights into what teams might be reading, right? So combing through past years and figuring out what may be applicable to the current topic you're debating is always a good start, right? And another thing that's important here for back files, not just knowing what old files from past years may be applicable on the topic, not just having access to all that stuff, not just knowing, being ready for every possible impact debate that you may have, but you also want to be ready for any sort of like back file check arguments, right? Con counter plans are sort of making a comeback this year. To me, it always seems like a back file kind of gut check argument. Bataille, Baudrillard sometimes are more applicable on other topics than they are some topics, right? But whatever the case may be, there are always going to be these sort of fringe arguments or arguments that could have links, they might not. So the best thing I can tell you is to be prepared to be unprepared. And you never really know how unprepared you are unless you kind of like sift through and sort of know, okay, look, we know we're kind of prepped out for, cap, set call, anti-blackness, and a few other critiques, right? But what are some critiques that may be like environmental specific that don't really pop off the top of my head, right? That's where the back files come in, right? You can go back to your back files, but oh, maybe someone might try to recycle an eco-managerialism critique. I need to make sure I write some 2 AC blocks for that. Some deep ecology stuff, environmental justice stuff, right? Whatever that stuff is, be ready, right? And I think the best way to do that is to sort of check these back files. Be prepared to be unprepared though, right? So when I say write your blocks, yes, of course, always, but you should be in a position to where the more blocks that you have prepped out for possible back files, the less likely it is that you will find yourself in a situation with nothing to say. Because if you prep out enough from an app perspective and possible counter plans that could, that could possibly solve the app, like some like agent counter plans or something, or some critiques that may not come around except only on environmental topics, right? The ability to sort of cut blocks for those, find some cards that are applicable. You might find yourself in a round where, okay, maybe the link debate from this block is applicable to this argument the other team is reading, but maybe not the alternative in the impact stuff. But the alternative in the impact stuff from this other back file might be applicable too. You have now made prep for the 2AC much easier because you're not sitting there trying to cut blocks in round to read. More so, you're just sort of figuring out, okay, look, this is applicable here, this is applicable there. They don't really, right? So that's one of the things you can sort of do. And in doing so, you have now been prepared to be unprepared, right? Because you've cut blocks for everything that you know that's coming out of camp and everything that might come out of what people went home and researched. So now, even if you don't have a specific argument for what X team reads, you know, the argument that X team reads is super similar to this you already have blocked out. Maybe we just should change the verbiage or the vernacular a little bit to fit or be responsive to what they said. Prepared to be unprepared. All right. Third, impact turns are fun, right? The first few tournaments of the year, teams will sort of run to the margins while we try to figure out, like, what is the topic, right? And so because of that, you may find yourself in situations where you don't have an answer for solvency, or a specific indite of why their plan mechanism won't solve. You may not have a specific reason why the piece of legislation that they want to pass is won't solve. You don't have a specific reason why, like, their methodology, if they're reading a planless app, won't solve, or some presumptuous type claim. But instead, you can sort of go for the impact turn debate, right? If they're reading a big econ app, don't worry about, you know, if you think, you know, we ain't really got nothing to say on the mechanism, you know, slap some, you know, some of your, you know, your arguments that you feel comfortable coming into the debate tournament that you've already prepped as like the crux of your next strats. What are our generics in this situation, that situation? But then you get to case and you're like, we don't really have much in terms of case, assuming it doesn't, you know, create multiple worlds. And if it does, be ready to defend that. But, you know, impact turns are always helpful. They read a big econ app, well, we're just going to read DDEV and keep pushing. You know what I'm saying? And force you to sort of, you know, flip the debate a little bit. You want to read a bunch of reasons why hedge is good. We'll read 10 reasons why hedge is terrible on the app. And now you have to answer all of our impact turns, right? Because it's a underutilized negative strategy. As a judge, I really do enjoy good impact turn debates, right? And to be honest, you know, if you get really good at these, you know, earlier in the year, you know, going for impact turns is something that, you know, kind of takes a little moxie. You know, that's a bold move. You know, so in doing so, you know, if you do it right, judges a lot of times will reward you depending on who they are. I know I might. You do it right, you know, I'm gonna be like, okay, yeah, you could have gone for this argument, but you sat and gave me 5 minutes of DDEV very well, and you didn't really have to answer the plan. I don't care about the mechanism now. They're saying growth is good. You're saying it's terminally unsustainable. And as long as you win the debate, hey, I may give you 0.1 or 0.2 extra speaker points, just because of the fact that it is more difficult, in my opinion, to do that than just read some like app doesn't solve. Right. So we see what some examples are, right? Always, you know, I ain't saying read it in front of me or read it in front of every judge, but I think that, like, strategically in front of some people, Spark is something good to have in your back pocket as well, right? All of these are like instances of impact turn debates that should help you get some traction and should make debating the topic early in the season a little bit more manageable. Fourth, now, probably should just put a disclaimer here. It's on the second point. When I debated, okay, so Rosie Valdez and I debated together in high school our senior year, and she'll tell you, like, in high school, I was probably one of the biggest T hacks out there. I'd go for T sometimes when I didn't have to, or when we shouldn't, right? But because it's at the beginning of the year, right? And because of what I said earlier, that teams will oftentimes run to the margins, right? The community is testing what is and what isn't topical. So it's incumbent on the debaters to sort of set the parameters on what is and what isn't topical. Yeah, there's a topic paper, and yeah, they do research for that. And yeah, there's a wording committee, and yeah, we all vote on that. But, like, at the end of the day, the resolution is a collection of words that's meant to be interpreted, right? Whether we like the wording or not, whether we like the topic or not, it is a collection of words It is a word salad that we have to choose to figure out how we want to digest it, right? And so because of that, a robust T file can sort of be an equalizer, a great equalizer at the beginning of the year, right? And think about it like this. T debates aren't the kind of debates where you have to constantly cut updates like you will for politics, right? T debates aren't the type of debates where you have to be super ingratiated in your theory of power so that you're able to explain the link debate, any root cause claims or impact arguments you might be making, or the alternative. You don't need all that for T. You just need a fairly good understanding, a good grasp of grammar, what the topic is, how the words function in relation to others in the topic, and a really good impact. I'm not going to give y'all a T lecture. I'm pretty sure you're getting one from someone, right? But if you get really good at T, you always have that in your back pocket, right? A lot of times AF teams will sort of not take T for, they'll take T for granted. And in doing so, they sort of give you an opening to sort of level the playing field, right? A robust T file, when I competed, and Ms. Valdez Rosie will tell you, the first thing that we sort of like, that I was like, we have to get this done for the next draft, is put together a T file that was app specific for certain apps that we knew was coming out of camp, that were like some generics that we, like we'll take, we like these violations from this camp. Ooh, we really like this violation from this camp, and we sort of comprehensively compile it. But then we also add our own flavor and say, well, what does our research tell us what these words means, or what these terms of art mean, and what that means for the rest of the topic, right? And the last part is, because you don't want people to run away from topic engagement, right? So if we start accepting apps that are on the bounds or the margins of the topic early in the year, right, then by the time the end of the year comes, we have kind of stifled creativity, and what is actually topical is probably skewed to some degree, right? So now like your limits arguments make a lot more sense, right? Because maybe early in the year, over limiting might be good. You don't want to start with an overly broad, dense topic, because then that makes it impossible to be negative. Instead, earlier in the year, going for things like over limiting good, core of the topic, right? Competing interpretations. We don't know what's reasonable. I don't know why kids don't make these types of arguments, right? At the beginning of the year, an app saying, well, we're reasonably topical. In comparison to what, homie? Like camp, good luck with that. So I think a better argument, over limiting, you can sort of talk about why education and clash. Those arguments then start to sound a lot more compelling, because I'm like, yes, my ballot should sort of keep the activity or this team from running to the margins too quickly. You can get there eventually, maybe, right? But at the beginning of the year, we have to be able to sort of have a more limited topic, right? That sort of breadth versus depth debate, right? We don't want a wide breadth of arguments, but more so we want to sort of limit them down a little bit so we can get more in depth at the beginning, and then maybe we open up the playbook for the year. So being good at T will be your best friend. Conversely on the AF, right? Conversely on the AF, if you know that you're going to be one of these teams that ran to the margins, be ready for those debates, right? In the example I gave Ms. Valdez Rosie, one of the things that we did our senior year, we read a blatantly non-topical AF. So we stayed up all day, all night, constantly figuring out what is our answer for certain arguments, right? And then we'd have our answers for all the camp T violations. We'd even cut answers for our T violations in case someone read it against us. We would also sort of just make like generic blocks about like, well, just write out some we meets, right? What would this we meet mean in the context of like an over limiting versus under limiting, standards debate? Excuse me. How does this implicate things like clash, research, argument testing, refinement, those kinds of things, right? So you want to make sure, because the wider the topic is to start, it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the year goes on, which makes it more and more difficult to be negative, right? That is a very good selling point with some judges. T is always your best friend. Telling you. All right. Now, lastly, and this may be, don't take topic knowledge for granted, okay? Cannot stress this enough. We cannot take topic knowledge for granted. a lot of debaters assume that like judges know all the acronyms and stuff you're talking about, right? We be like, the EPA can enforce MPA, the EPA can enforce MPAs, and it's like, dude, like, sure, but like, what are you saying? Like, what did he say? Nobody knows what you are saying, right? So for judges sometimes, right, sort of giving me saying, hey, when we say the EPA, we're talking about the Environmental Protection Agency, or when we say MPA, we're talking about marine protected areas, right? When we say AA, we're talking about the Antiquities Act, sort of giving the judge those acronyms, right? Because a lot of times I think students too often take for granted judges' understanding of the topic. You all know that a lot of your judges teach at debate camps, that a lot of your judges are coaches, right? But in knowing that information, you also need to be aware of that we're like selfish too, right? If I'm in a bubble at Central and I'm also in a bubble at my camp, that's pretty much my understanding of the topic from those two instances, right? So I may not know as much about what got researched at another camp across the country because I wasn't there, right? So they may have researched an app or a portion of the app that I just didn't, that my kids at Central or the kids in my lab at the camp that I taught at, we just didn't research that, right? And so this is why it's important, right? If you're making an argument and you're spitting off a bunch of acronyms or you're referencing something that you have not fully explained, then what that does is that as a judge, I'm still flowing you, but I'm not processing you like you need me to, because I'm constantly like asking myself, well, what is this EPA they keep talking about? What is this? What is this? What are these like weird acronyms, which is an act that you blew through in a card that like I don't remember because that was 4 speeches ago and all y'all going a million miles an hour, right? So because of that, I'm wondering what you are talking about, which means that I'm not fully digesting your analysis. I'm writing it, I'm flowing it, but I'm not fully processing it. You want me fully processing your arguments. And this is something that I think is underutilized in debates, right? Early in the year, the ability to explain like literally what is going on to a judge can be the difference between a win and a loss. And I know that sounds like duh-ish, but like it's true. There are times where I have voted for teams against team, like I have team A, which is super technically sound, making decent arguments, but I'm a little opaque in terms of me understanding exactly what they're going for. But I have team B that may not be as technically proficient as team A, but they're able to better explain their arguments, what their arguments are, what they mean, the workability of them, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll probably have a better understanding of what team B is doing, even though team A may be a better technical debating team, right? So you want to make sure that, you don't put yourself in a situation where the inability to explain what your app does keeps you from winning a bout. You get into 2AR and you're like, but we told you the app solves, and I'm like, bro, I don't really know what your app does. So you telling me it solves what? Like that was grossly underexplained throughout the debate. And I feel like the first few tournaments of the year, judges oftentimes lament the fact that we sometimes don't even know what's happening in some of these debates because information is taken for granted. So just like, this year, like water systems of the United States, WOTUS, MPAs, not every camp researches these. So if you just get up and be like, the app is WOTUS, like, all right, like waterways of the United States is cool, but like, what does that mean, right? Yeah, so just quick review. Okay. I was gonna say, I thought we had some conclusions. All right, so conclusion. How you prep matters more for the first few tournaments than what you prep, okay? How you prep is more important in the first few tournaments than what you prep. Now, obviously, if you prep bad arguments, it's important not to do that. But what I'm saying is, when camp is over and we all go to our respective places and we start, the first, little bit of time we have before the season kicks off, we're all sort of at our respective places trying to figure out what are we going to write or read that like nobody else is probably cutting, So everyone's looking to catch everybody off guard. So the first few tournaments are like literal like surprise gotcha moments where literally everybody's breaking new, right? So how you prep and knowing that like it doesn't matter if they break a new planless AF, we have a specific strategy against planless AFs. And if it's a topic germane planless AF, i.e. they're reading like some environmental impacts or a method or something, then we know we can at least get inroads here or there or somewhere else. Block writing is essential, right? Writing blocks for arguments that you know came out of camps or expected arguments, right? Certain counter plans, disads, critiques if you're AF, right? Being able to isolate, you know, that like being able to answer like winners win, da 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 da, but also on the negative too. Excuse me. If I'm a critique debater, and I know that like it's difficult for me to sort of predict or cut analysis, like cut specific link cards for all these AFs that I can't predict. Instead, I will just write up like some link analysis and write blocks predicated off of the topic itself, maybe just USFG engagement, but also things that are like rooted in the literature, right? So if most AFs are going to talk about the environment being exploited or polluted in some way, shape, or form, a lot will this year. So even if you just write some link arguments that is about the attempts to redress or address pollution and why that will fail and why until we address capitalism and make those types of root cause claims, right? And you start incorporating that in your blocks, that'll be helpful when you start hitting arguments that you're not familiar with. Even if you may not have a specific card for this AF, if they're an AF that attempts to like solve pollution, just get them to admit that in cross-X, and now all of your awesome link analysis that you blocked out and wrote is now applicable, right? But nothing replaces, oh, let me get to this. It's a lot easier to edit a block in a round than it is to just cold write one in prep time, right? And I was notorious for this. I think probably drove, I think it probably made Rosie upset a lot of times because, you know, as much as I was good about prepping, there were just some arguments I'd be like, bro, I'm not prepping that. And then the thing that I chose not to prep would be what we end up hitting like round 1 or 2. And she'd look at me like, don't get that look from your partner because it never feels good, right? Nothing replaces knowledge of the topic, right? The more you learn, the easier debating should be, right? Should make all of your T analysis easier, core of the topic, limits, class, research, what, right? Why competing interpretations matter. Is your topic, is your interpretation more ingratiated in the literature? Does your definition have an intent to define? These are all things that you probably won't be able to adequately explain if your knowledge of the topic is shallow. Additionally, if you understand the topic properly, you should be able to make link analysis for critiques a lot easier, and also should help with explaining like why the AF sort of triggers the link to whatever disads you're going for writing. Okay, last slide. Don't forget, okay? These are some things just don't forget. Debate is so taxing and so emotionally draining that you have to make sure that you don't overwork yourself. And I say this as a person who needs to take his own advice, right? Taking time for yourself away from debate can sort of help your brain recharge, right? If your brain's a muscle, right? Just like the muscles we use to lift weights, just like the muscles we use to run, to walk, just like the muscles we use to talk, just like every other muscle in our body, right? Every muscle that we use needs some type of rest, right? I'm not upstanding walking around all day. Even though I try to be active and even though I work out, I don't run all day, right? So there are times when I'm not overexerting myself in some departments. If you're always processing debate stuff and you never give your brain a chance to just decompress, relax, then your that time you spend prepping is pretty much wasted. The blocks you write are going to be terrible. You're not going to be fully there. So whatever you're reading, you're not processing, you're not cutting it properly, whatever the case may be. I myself have things that I do to sort of help my brain sort of reset, whether that's playing video games, taking a run, working out, taking a nap, playing with my niece, talking to someone on the phone, whatever the case may be. I try to do something that resets my brain and gets me off of debate for a while so that when I come back, I'm fresh and I can sort of dive back in. The ballot is not a referendum on your intellect as a debater. student, researcher, but rather who won the round, right? And the reason I say that is because the last point that's here, right? You can start off the year probably not getting the results that you would like. But if you keep your head down and keep working and keep refining your arguments and keep restructuring your blocks and take what judges tell you and sift through what's necessary, what's not, what you can take, what you can't, and keep refining yourself, then you'll get to a point later on in the year where you're doing much better, right? And all that prep work and all that topic knowledge that you spent learning, all the stuff that you spent learning what came out of camps, what didn't, right? Now you're able to better ascertain and understand that, oh, they're reading this, they're reading so-and-so's version of set call. I remember their all evidence was terrible and poorly highlighted. If they have the same terrible highlighting in the same card, it's game over, right? So your ability to recognize those things is important, but you won't get that if you don't do that preseason prep. Every year, and you see it on the coaches poll, every year, there are teams that start off super hot, right? They come out the gate smoking hot, and they win a bunch of rounds. They may win the first couple tournaments, and then it's unsustainable, right? Because everybody caught up with them. They were really good at sort of the first step of the topic. They were really good at defending arguments that were cut at camp that they understood, right? But as this season went on, they were unable to sort of redefine themselves, reinvent the arguments that they were writing or going for, right? So every year, there are always teams that start off hot and then fizz out by March. The debate season is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And because it is a marathon and not a sprint, the way in which you prep or the way in which you approach the preseason before your first few tournaments will impact how well you do, right? And even if you don't, say like you end up upside down or say you don't clear at some tournaments, right? If you're not winning these debates on a technical aspect, but you're still understanding the topic, you still are prepping. Once the tides start to balance out and we all as a community start to understand what direction we're going in the topic, you now know the better pivots for T, right? You now know what is a more compelling K-link analysis. You now know what is the better presumption argument. You now know what is the better circumvention argument for certain apps. But you would not know that had you not put in that time to prep, right? So just going to go over the 5 things once again. First, scout, camp evidence and camps. Check your back files. So important. We told you twice. Impact turns are fun. Don't be afraid of them. T is always and should be one of your better friends in debate. And last but not least, don't take your topic knowledge for granted. Don't take topic knowledge for granted. So thank you for listening. And I hope this was beneficial to you all in some way, shape, or form. If you have any questions, you can just email me and I'd be glad to help you out in any way I can.